Hello, my friend. In this course, in this series of videos, in this playlist, we're going to speak about Linux. And this is the very first video. So we're going to talk about Linux, say why choose Linux and what Linux is in simple words. To begin with, let's see a little about the history of Linux. So first things we need to know is Unix. Unix was an operating system designed by AT&T a long time ago, and it's now more like a standard. People have operating systems designed based on the design of Unix, or maybe based on Microsoft DOS. And one day, Richard Stallman, who was a person with a different belief in software, decided to create GNU. So what is GNU? GNU is a free open source operating system, and it means G stands for GNU, and N stands for not, and U stands for Unix. It means GNU is not Unix, because GNU has the design of Unix, but it's open source, and every tool it has is open source. And what do we mean by open source, really? If you search open source software on the internet, you can find very interesting things. But basically, an open source program is a program that you can see its code, and you can modify it if you need to, and you can publish the modified version if you need to. You're free to do that. GNU was a nice operating system, but it missed something. GNU didn't have a kernel. And one day, a young man, because he thought it's funny, designed a kernel and programmed a kernel. And that kernel he designed is now known as a Linux kernel. And Linux became the kernel of the GNU operating system. A kernel, my friend, is the heart of an operating system. It's something that connects that operating system to the hardware of your laptop or your computer. Every operating system has a kernel, and Linux is the kernel of the GNU operating system. And since it's open source, people use that to create different operating systems that use Linux as kernel and use GNU as the software system. And they are all called Linux distributions or distros. We have many of them, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 of them, and we will talk about them in this course later, so don't worry. But the question is, why should we ever use Linux when we have big operating systems like Windows or Mac OS? Why should we use Linux? First thing I want to talk about is the ability of customization, which is very important. How much customization can you do on a Windows system? Basically, you can change the wallpaper and some colors at some point, but you don't have much choices for this. Also, Mac OS has a user-friendly, beautiful design, but it's still limited. You cannot change it if you don't like it. You cannot choose different options. But when it comes to customization in Linux, Linux gives you freedom. You have different desktop environments to choose and install. For example, right now I'm using Budgie desktop. You can use KDE Plasma, you can use XFCE, GNOME, or whatever you like. And each of them has different options and features for customization. For example, if I come here, open the Budgie settings, I can show this to you. I can say for this panel we have down here, I can say I want it to be on the top part of my screen. You see, it moved to the top, or maybe on the left, or so the bottom. You can also create another one at the top, or maybe any place you like. Add any applet you like. For example, I add a clock and I bring it to the middle. It's here. I wanted to show the date too, show the seconds, use a 24-hour time, and I can also change the clock format, custom format for date and time, and different time zones. And I can use many different applets here. There's no limitation, and every desktop you use has different options. So I remove the top panel right now. We will talk about different desktops as the course goes on. So Linux gives you much more options for customization which you cannot find on Windows or macOS. So this is the first reason. And next one is security. As you might know, Windows and macOS are not open source. You cannot see the source code of them. Then they may say that this is because they want to keep it safe, they want to keep it secure. When no one sees the code, then no one knows how to break the code, how to break into your system, steal your data. But that's actually might not be correct, because operating system like Windows or Mac OS is designed by a team of developers in Apple or in Microsoft. But Linux is free of any borders. Linux is maybe developed by thousands of people. Anyone who is an expert in operating systems can come and contribute to the Linux kernel, help make it better. So if someone finds a security flaw and finds it dangerous or anything, any problem in the system, they will fix it. So maybe thousands of people are working on Linux, so it's basically more secure and also more stable, because so people try their best to keep it working. And also one more thing is that we should say we have LTS Linux and we have rolling release Linux, which are two different variations. In an LTS, like Ubuntu, which means long time service, Ubuntu, Linux Mint or others, you are given 5 years of support for that system. But in a rolling release you have bleeding edge updates. It means your software is always up to date. You get the latest versions of different applications. So if you want stability, so much of stability, you can keep using an LTS. But if you, like me, want the latest versions of programs, you can use a rolling release. We will talk about these later in choosing distro and other parts, so nothing to worry about. And now let's say, where in the world we use Linux. We use Linux for servers. Most web servers today use Linux instead of other operating systems, and the reason why is that Linux is much easier to control, to manage. We can see that in the system administration parts and networking and everything we talk later. You can see that Linux is much easier to manage. Problems are much easier to solve sometimes, but Windows or Mac OS might not be a good choice for this, even though we have Windows servers, but Linux is always a better option for this one. If you are using an Android phone, you should know that Android is actually a modified version of Linux. I personally call it a Linux without the freedom, because you cannot have the freedom you will see in this course on a Linux mobile. Also, embedded devices, Internet of Things devices may use Linux. Basically, they use Linux, even though you can say your refrigerator right now is using Linux to work. And also cybersecurity. People who work in the cybersecurity field also use Linux because Linux can give them straight access to the hardware. They can modify, they can control different hardware. For example, the Wi-Fi, they can control it, monitor it, and everything. So this is this was the first one. Subscribe for more videos on this section. We'll have a lot to talk about. I hope you enjoyed it, and do not forget to comment.